Look at her closely, a girl of only 14, standing alone at the side of a long dirt road with a cardboard suitcase that sags under its own weight and a rope tied around the neck of a cow. The wind cuts across the open fields, carrying dust and a sharp bite of cold that reddens her cheeks. But she does not flinch. She presses her lips together, refusing to let the trembling reach her face. Her name is Lena Porter, and in the span of 3 days she has lost everything except the animals standing beside her. Her mother is buried. Her home has been taken. Her childhood has been stripped away, and the people who should have protected her, the only relatives she had left, watched her fall into ruin and laughed. The sky hangs heavy above her, a pale, washed-out blue that looks as tired as she feels. The land below stretches wide and empty, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting to see whether a girl so young can survive everything that has just collapsed on top of her. Lena tightens her grip on the fraying handle of the cardboard suitcase. The morning dew has softened the edges. It feels like it will fall apart any moment, just like her. 3 days, only 3 days since she laid her mother, Anna Porter, to rest beneath the old oak tree behind the farmhouse. 3 days since her life pivoted so violently she's still dizzy from the turn. She remembers the moment her world cracked. Her step-uncle Franklin, a man who always smelled faintly of cheap liquor and stale tobacco, stood on the porch with a stack of papers clutched in his hands. On either side of him were his brothers, Harold and Seth, men with cold eyes and colder intentions. Lena had always known they didn't like her mother. She simply never realized how deep that dislike ran, or how greed could turn it into something uglier. "Come here, girl," Franklin had said, his voice overly soft, like he was speaking to a stray animal he was trying not to scare off. Lena remembered the way his fingers tapped lazily on the papers, tapping like a man proud of what he held, proud of the damage he was about to inflict. She obeyed. Her sandals barely made a sound on the dusty ground as she approached them. Her hands were still trembling from crying the night before. She felt so small, standing in front of the 3 men, small and stupid, like a child who hadn't yet realized the world had teeth. Franklin held up the papers. "These here are documents your mama signed," he said, "to ensure your future is taken care of." Lena's stomach knotted. Her mother had told her something different, had said the farm, the house, the animals, all of it belonged to Lena and would remain hers until she came of age. She trusted her mother. Her mother never lied. Her mother never manipulated. Her mother never smiled while planning an act of cruelty. But Franklin was smiling. Harold and Seth were too, like they were sharing a joke only they understood. She couldn't keep up with the debt, Franklin said, so she put everything in our name. Now that she's gone, we're responsible for the property. Lena shook her head. No, she didn't owe anything. She couldn't have. "Don't call your mother a liar," Harold snapped. His voice carried the weight of someone who enjoyed authority, enjoyed crushing things that dared challenge him. "I'm not," Lena whispered. "I'm saying you're lying." Before she could blink, Seth took one menacing step forward. He was huge, shoulders like stacked bricks, hands large enough to crush a small animal, the kind of man who knew fear was a tool and used it shamelessly. "Watch your mouth," he growled. "You're lucky we're being generous." The word generous tasted rotten coming from him. Lena stumbled back. Their eyes, those 3 dark pits where sympathy should have lived, held nothing but calculation. They had planned this, she realized. The strange visits they made while her mother was sick, the closed-door conversations, the rushing of papers. None of it had been innocent. "You're lying," she repeated, but softer now, like her voice was slipping away. Franklin rolled his eyes. He had tired of pretending. "It's done," he said. "The farm is ours. You, girl, have no claim." Lena felt something inside her collapse. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. The air around her thickened like molasses. The house behind them blurred. The fields felt unfamiliar, hostile. Everywhere she looked, she saw ghosts, memories, her mother teaching her how to milk a cow, her father carving her name into the old barn door before he died. All those memories were being ripped from her like loose threads. She forced out a question, barely audible. "Where am I supposed to go?" Franklin shrugged. "That ain't our problem. You're young, you can work. Just not here." He lit a cigarette. The first breath he took sent a cloud of sour smoke drifting toward her. That smell, that harsh, burnt scent, embedded itself in Lena's memory. She would never be able to forget it. It smelled like betrayal. 10 minutes, Harold said firmly. "Pack your things and be gone." Lena ran inside before they could see her tears. Her room, small, bare, familiar, felt unbearably empty. Her childhood hadn't been filled with riches, but it had been hers. Now it felt like a crime scene. Every drawer she touched, every item she packed, felt like she was stealing from a life that no longer belonged to her. Her mother's photo, a worn dress, a hairbrush with several teeth missing, a small rag doll her father had mended years ago. She crammed everything into the cardboard suitcase. It barely closed. Outside, she could hear the men arguing about who would get the cattle, who would take the tractor, who would tear down the old shed. They were dividing her life before her body was even out of the house. When she stepped outside again, the morning sun was trying, weakly, to pierce the clouds. She didn't look at the men, didn't answer their mocking stares. She walked past them, slowly, head high, even though inside she felt like she was falling apart. But Franklin stopped her. For a moment, just a breath, Lena thought she saw something like pity, a flicker of conscience, a sliver of regret. But that was wishful thinking. He walked toward the cattle pen and disappeared inside. Lena waited. When he returned, he was dragging a cow by a rope, an awkward-looking brown and white cow with one horn slightly bent inward. Mabel, that was her name. Lena's mother had named her after an old friend, said the cow had gentle eyes and a stubborn streak that reminded her of someone she once knew. Franklin thrust the rope into Lena's free hand. "Here," he said. "So you can't say we kicked you out with nothing. The cow is yours, your inheritance." Harold and Seth burst into laughter. A single cow, out of the dozens they owned, out of the hundreds of acres, out of all the machinery, all the tools, all the livestock, a cow. Their cruelty was almost artistic. Lena didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat burned with humiliation she refused to let spill out. She turned away, suitcase in one hand, rope in the other, and started walking down the long dirt path that led away from the farm, away from her home, away from every memory she'd ever loved. She didn't look back. If she'd looked back, her heart would have shattered. Wind pushed against her, raising dust around her ankles. Mabel trotted beside her, slow, confused, but loyal as ever. The world felt too big, too empty, too raw. Hour after hour passed. The sun climbed, then slowly dipped toward the horizon. Lena's shoulders ached, her feet throbbed, her stomach cramped with hunger. But she kept walking. She didn't know where to go, didn't know who would help her. Everyone in town respected her step-uncles. They were wealthy, influential, dangerous. No one would risk angering them for the sake of a 14-year-old orphan. By late afternoon, Lena felt like the earth was tilting beneath her feet. Her knees wobbled. She stopped at the side of the road and sat on a flat stone, dropping the suitcase beside her. The cow, sweet, patient Mabel, lowered her head and nudged Lena gently, sensing the girl's sadness without knowing how to fix it. Lena buried her face in her hands and sobbed. She cried for her mother, for her father, for the home she had lost, for the people who had betrayed her, for the future that suddenly seemed like a dark, endless tunnel. Her tears dripped onto her dress, into the dirt, onto the suitcase that already felt too heavy for her to carry. When she had no more tears left, she sat silently, breathing shallowly. The air smelled like dust and dry grass. Mabel chewed calmly beside her, the rhythmic sound a strange comfort. She pressed her forehead against Mabel's warm flank. "It's just you and me now," Lena whispered. "We're all we have." The sun finally set. Darkness crawled across the fields, slow but unstoppable, swallowing the road and the sky and every sense of safety Lena had left. Coyotes howled in the distance. Crickets filled the quiet with their ceaseless chirping. The night grew cold, much colder than she expected. Panic pricked at the edges of her mind. They couldn't stay here, not in the open, not with predators nearby, not with the temperature dropping. She stood, shaky but determined, and pulled Mabel off the path, heading toward the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off something. A stream. Maybe there would be shelter nearby. There was, a cluster of low shrubs and thick bushes beside a broken stone wall that must have once been part of a larger structure. The wind didn't reach them there. Lena tied Mabel to one of the sturdier bushes and sat against the wall. She fished through the suitcase, pulling out the thin wool blanket her mother had given her. She wrapped it around her shoulders, but it barely kept out the cold. Her stomach growled, her lips were dry, but her mind was too tangled to think of food or water. Then a memory flickered. Her mother in the kitchen, a warm pot on the stove, fresh milk being stirred slowly, the smell of cheese filling the room. Lena blinked. Mabel was a dairy cow, a fresh one. If she could milk her, if she could collect even a little, it could save them. She looked around frantically. She had no bucket, nothing except there, half buried near the stone wall, was a rusty tin can. Someone must have dropped it long ago. Lena scraped off the dirt with her sleeve, then hurried to the stream to wash it out, scrubbing with sand until it felt as clean as she could make it. Her hands were numb, her fingers stiff, her breath fogged in the night air. But she positioned herself beside Mabel and whispered, "I'll try, okay? Just hold still." At first, nothing came out. Her hands fumbled, her confidence cracked. She felt foolish, hopeless, terrified. Then, a stream of warm milk hit the bottom of the can. Lena gasped. Tears stung her eyes again, but these weren't from grief. They were from relief. She milked slowly, carefully, exactly the way her mother had taught her when she was younger. The can wasn't big, but she managed to fill it halfway. She sat beneath the moonlight, cradling that small miracle. The milk tasted warm, sweet, alive. She drank every drop, and for the first time in days, something inside her unclenched. She wasn't safe, she wasn't stable, she wasn't okay, but she wasn't defeated. Not yet. She curled up beside Mabel, wrapping the blanket tightly around her, letting the cow's radiating warmth keep her from freezing in the night. And in that fragile little bubble of safety, she whispered into the darkness, "I'll survive, Mom. I'll make it, I promise." Tomorrow she would walk toward the town her mother had once mentioned, a place called Riverside, far past the hills, a place with a market, with strangers, with opportunities, a place where a girl with nothing but a cow might build a new life. But tonight, she slept, exhausted, cold, but alive, and that was enough for now. Morning crawled over the horizon slowly, as if unsure whether the world deserved light after the night Lena had endured. A pale orange hue seeped into the sky, brushing the edges of the clouds and waking the birds hidden deep within the brush. Their songs were soft, cautious, like they sensed the weight of sorrow still hanging in the air. Lena stirred beneath her thin blanket. Her back ached from sleeping against the cold stone wall, and her legs were stiff from the long walk the day before. For a moment, just a moment, she forgot where she was. She expected to feel the soft straw of her bed in the farmhouse, to smell the earthy scent of the old barn, to hear her mother humming in the kitchen while preparing breakfast. But when she opened her eyes, reality struck her like a fist. She was outside, in the middle of nowhere, with a battered suitcase, an empty stomach, and a cow, and her mother would never hum again. The grief slammed into her chest with such force she had to bite her lip to keep from crying. She sat there quietly, breathing deeply, letting the cold air sting her lungs until it steadied her shaking heart. Mabel stretched beside her, shaking her ears and snorting softly. The cow's warm presence nudged Lena back to herself. "Good morning," Lena whispered, her voice raspy. She reached out and stroked Mabel's neck. "At least I'm not alone." The cow blinked slowly, as if in agreement. Lena checked the rusty tin can she'd cleaned the night before. Her stomach twisted at the memory of drinking the warm milk, how it had tasted like hope. She needed that again. Without hesitation, she knelt beside Mabel and began to milk her carefully. Her fingers were clumsy from the cold, but soon she heard the soft rhythm of liquid hitting metal. When she lifted the can, it was half full. Enough for breakfast, enough to walk again. She drank slowly, savoring every drop. The warmth spread through her body like a promise she didn't dare speak aloud. Once she finished, she packed her blanket back into the suitcase and tied the rope to Mabel's neck. "Come on, girl," she said softly. "We've got a long way to go." The morning air felt less cruel than the night had, but the path ahead stretched endlessly over the rolling hills. Lena took one last look at the tiny space where she had slept. It wasn't much, but it had been a sanctuary for one night, a tiny patch of safety in a world that had suddenly become far too large. She turned away and started walking. The sun climbed higher, warming her shoulders. For a while, the rhythm of her footsteps and the steady sound of Mabel's hooves kept her from thinking too much. She just moved, step, step, step. The suitcase bumped against her thigh with each stride. The cardboard groaned every time she swung it. She didn't know how much longer it would hold, but she prayed it wouldn't fall apart until she reached Riverside. She couldn't afford to lose even one item inside. Each object was a thread tying her to her mother. By mid-morning, the land changed. The dry fields gave way to patches of wildflowers, bursts of yellow and purple, swaying gently in the breeze. The air smelled sweeter here, filled with the scent of fresh grass and distant water. It gave her a tiny spark of courage, but hope was fickle. It didn't take long for fear to return. As she rounded a bend in the road, she saw a group of 3 older boys sitting on a broken fence near a cluster of trees. They looked like they belonged there. Sunburned, lanky, clothes dusty, boots worn, farm boys or ranch hands. They were about 16 or 17, just old enough to be dangerous, and just young enough to think it was fun. They noticed her immediately. "Hey," one of them said, sliding off the fence. His voice carried a cocky confidence she instantly distrusted. "Where you headed with that cow?" Lena's heart picked up. She clutched the suitcase handle tighter, her knuckles whitening. "Just passing through," she answered quietly. The boys exchanged glances. That was never a good sign. "Looks like you're alone," another boy added, hopping down and circling her slowly. "That's a nice-looking cow. Bet she's worth something." Lena's mouth went dry. She stepped closer to Mabel, placing her body between the cow and the boys. "She's not for sale." They smirked. They weren't asking. The tallest boy leaned forward, eyes gleaming like a predator that had spotted an unguarded meal. Didn't ask if she was. Might be we just take her. No, Lena said, her voice firmer than she expected. She backed up slowly. Mabel snorted nervously. The boys followed her steps with lazy confidence, like they were enjoying a game. Come on! We're just kidding, one said, but the lie was so thin it tore apart instantly. We just want to take a look. Lena had grown up around men who smiled while doing horrible things. She knew that tone too well. She turned around and ran, her legs pumped hard, her lungs burning as she sprinted down the road. Mabel trotted anxiously behind her, the rope swinging wildly between them. Lena didn't dare look back, but she heard the boys shout and give chase. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted to escape her body. Not again, not today, not after everything. But after a few moments, the shouting faded. When she finally risked a glance over her shoulder, the boys had stopped running, doubled over and laughing. They hadn't chased her because they wanted the cow. They chased her because it entertained them. Cruelty didn't always need a reason. Lena slowed, gasping for breath. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry again. She wiped her face with her sleeve, gripping Mabel's rope tightly. "You scared me," she whispered to the cow. "But we're okay. They didn't catch us." Her legs trembled as she walked, but she forced herself onward. Each mile felt harder. The sun grew hotter, the road dustier. Sweat dripped down her back and soaked the collar of her dress. Hours passed. By afternoon, her feet were blistered and bleeding. She winced with every step, but stopping wasn't an option. Riverside was still miles away. She couldn't sleep on the road again. Not after last night. Not with the boys behind her. Not with her fear clawing at her every time she heard a rustle in the grass. She had to keep moving. Her hunger gnawed at her belly. She had nothing left to eat. No bread. No fruit, nothing but the memory of warm milk that now felt like a dream. She forced herself to think of her mother. "You're stronger than you know, Lena. The world can break you or shape you. You decide." Her mother had believed she was strong. She had to prove her right. Late in the afternoon, the landscape shifted again. Trees appeared, taller, thicker, greener. A river wound through the valley, sparkling beneath the sun like a ribbon of silver. The sight nearly made her sob with relief. Water meant rest. Water meant safety. Water meant they might both make it to Riverside alive. She guided Mabel down the gentle slope, her legs shaky with exhaustion. When they reached the riverbank, the cool breeze coming off the water felt like a blessing. Mabel dipped her head immediately and drank deeply. Lena knelt beside her cow and splashed water onto her face, letting it drip down her neck and arms. The shock of cold made her gasp, but it revived her. She washed her feet, wincing as the water stung her open blisters. For a few minutes, she simply sat there, letting the world fall quiet. Birds swooped overhead. The river bubbled gently against the rocks. Trees rustled softly in the warm breeze. For a fleeting moment, everything felt calm. She looked up at the sky. It was still bright, but the sun was beginning to tilt toward the west. She had a few hours of daylight left, enough to reach the outskirts of Riverside. Maybe. She stood, dried her feet as best she could, and reached for Mabel's rope. "Let's go," she whispered. But that's when she spotted something across the river. Smoke, not thick, dark smoke from a fire, but thin trails rising from chimneys. Buildings peeked between the trees, small wooden structures, a few brick ones, rooftops that glowed soft gold in the sunlight. Her breath caught. Riverside. She'd made it. She felt a sob climb up her throat, this time shaped not by grief, but by relief. Her knees threatened to give out, and she had to steady herself on Mabel to avoid collapsing. The town wasn't large, but it was bigger than anything she'd ever seen. Fences lined the edges of the forest. A few horses grazed near the river. The road widened and became smoother, marked with wagon tracks and footprints. People lived there. People who didn't know her. People who didn't know Franklin or Harold or Seth. People who didn't know she was nothing but a penniless orphan with a cow. She swallowed hard. "This is it," she whispered to Mabel. "This is where we start over." She took her first step toward Riverside, but something moved at the edge of her vision. A wagon, drawn by two horses, creaking loudly, barreling down the road toward her. Her heartbeat spiked. The driver, an older man with a weathered face and a hat pulled low, pulled the reins, slowing the horses as he approached the river crossing. His eyes landed on her, on the cow, on the suitcase. He frowned, not angry, more confused, as if trying to piece together why a girl so young was wandering alone so far from any home. "You headed into town?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Lena hesitated. She had no idea whether this man could be trusted. Her uncles had taught her that trust was dangerous, but she couldn't stay outside another night. She couldn't risk running into more boys like earlier. She couldn't risk starving or freezing, so she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm going to Riverside." The man scratched his chin. "You from around here?" She shook her head. "Got family in town?" Another shake. He studied her closely, too closely. She dropped her gaze to the ground, bracing for judgment, for rejection, for a harsh word that would send her walking again. But instead, he sighed. "Well," he said, "no child should be out here alone." He nodded toward the wagon. "Come on. You and your cow can ride with me. I'll take you into town." Lena blinked. Her throat tightened. The offer was simple, but it felt monumental. This could be a trick, or it could be a miracle. She looked at Mabel. The cow looked back calmly, chewing grass, unbothered by the world's dangers. Sometimes Lena wished she could think like that, live like that. Just stay grounded and present and safe. She took a breath. "Okay," she said, finally. The man helped her onto the wagon and tied Mabel securely to the back. The wooden seat creaked under her weight. As the horses started moving, Lena clutched her suitcase tightly, unsure whether to feel fear or hope. The road dipped, the wagon swayed, and Riverside came fully into view. Buildings packed tighter, people walking, vendors calling out, children laughing, smoke drifting lazily from stone chimneys. A real town, a new world. And yet, Lena's heart beat unevenly. The closer they drew, the more uncertain she became. What if no one wanted to help her? What if she couldn't find work? What if the boys from earlier followed her? What if her uncles came looking? What if she failed? Her chest tightened painfully. But then she remembered her mother's voice, soft, warm, unwavering. "You are stronger than the world wants you to be." The wagon rolled to a stop in the center of Riverside. People turned to stare, some curious, some suspicious, some sympathetic. Mabel mooed loudly, turning even more heads. Lena flushed with embarrassment. "This is the market square," the man told her. "If you need help, you'll find someone here who can point you in the right direction." She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "Really?" He tipped his hat. "Take care, kid." And just like that, he rode away. Lena stood alone in the bustling square. Noise buzzed around her. Vendors shouting prices, chickens clucking from cages, horses snorting, people haggling. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed. She wasn't ready, but she had no choice. The barn was colder than the house, not bitterly so, but enough that the chill clung to Lena's skin, waking her fully as she stepped inside. The wooden doors creaked behind her, and the scent of hay, old wood, and warm milk wrapped around her like an old quilt. Mabel was already there, tied loosely to a post and munching on a pile of fresh hay. Her ears flicked toward Lena as she entered, and a soft, lowing sound vibrated from her chest, something like relief or greeting or simply recognition. "Good girl," Lena whispered, giving Mabel's neck a stroke. Ruth stood in the center of the barn, sleeves rolled up, hands already busy with the morning chores. She worked with smooth precision, like someone who had spent decades with her hands deep in the rhythm of farm life. Buckets, rags, tools neatly hung on hooks, nothing out of place, yet somehow everything felt heavier today. "Come here, sweetheart," Ruth said gently, though her voice carried a tightness that hadn't been there yesterday. "Let's see those hands. You said you've milked before." Lena nodded and stepped closer. Ruth guided her with patient movements. "Relax your fingers, don't pinch, squeeze lower, steady, that's it." Warm milk streamed into the tin pail with a soft, rhythmic sound. It should have been peaceful, it should have soothed her, but the memory of Henry's voice, sharp, warning, kept echoing in her mind. "Dangerous, Ruth. She's just a child. You're letting your heart lead again." Again, that word stuck like a thorn. Again? What had happened before? She wanted to ask. She wanted to force the truth out of the silence pressing between them. But Ruth's face remained unreadable as they worked. Kind, yes. Gentle, yes. But also shadowed, holding something back. When they finished milking, Ruth took the pail and carried it toward the house. "I'll strain this," she said. "You take Mabel to the pasture." Lena nodded and began leading the cow outside. The morning sun was soft, barely stretching over the horizon. Dew sparkled like scattered diamonds on the grass. A faint mist hovered over the fields, giving everything an otherworldly glow. In another life, another world, this might have felt like paradise. But today, the air tasted like a held breath. She tied Mabel to a long lead rope on a fence post, giving her plenty of room to graze. Mabel nudged her hand once more before lowering her head and chomping happily into the grass. Lena managed a small smile, despite the knot twisting in her stomach. At least one of them felt at peace. She found Ruth in the kitchen, straining milk into glass jars. The quiet sound of liquid pouring filled the room. A loaf of bread cooled on the counter. The scene looked peaceful, safe enough to hold her bruised heart without letting it fall apart. "Ruth?" Lena asked. "Yes, sweetheart? Why did Henry come here this morning?" Ruth's hands stilled. She didn't turn around. She didn't answer. She simply took a slow breath. Lena stepped closer, the wooden floor creaking under her bare feet. "You said he gossips," Lena said carefully. "But he wasn't gossiping. He was angry. He sounded like..." Her voice wavered. Like he thinks I'm dangerous? Ruth turned then, and for the first time since meeting her, Lena saw fear in the woman's eyes. Not fear of Lena, no, fear for her. Trail? Ruth snapped. What trail? She walked into town with a cow. She didn't creep here like a criminal. Footsteps thundered as Franklin and the others, Harold and Seth, moved deeper into the house. You don't understand, Franklin said. She's our niece. She ran away from home. She's not right in the head. We need to take her back. Lena's breath stopped. She could practically hear Ruth's disbelief. Ran away? Ruth repeated slowly. She told me you threw her out. A pause. Cold, sharp, dangerous. She lied, Franklin said. Kids lie. Ruth's voice dropped to steel. Not about that. Something crashed. Maybe a chair thrown aside. You're hiding her, Seth snarled. You always did like strays. Ruth's next words came low and deadly. You lay one hand on that girl and Lena didn't hear the rest, because the closet door ripped open. Her scream caught in her throat. Harold stood there, looming, face twisted with anger and a sick sort of triumph. There you are, he hissed. He grabbed her arm roughly. No, stop, she cried, struggling, kicking, trying to wrench free. Ruth's voice rang out from below. Let her go! Harold dragged Lena toward the stairs, but Ruth met them halfway up, fury blazing in her eyes. You touch her again, Ruth warned, and I will break your arm. Harold sneered. You and what army? This one. Ruth swung the milking stool so hard it cracked across Harold's shoulder. He yelped, stumbled, lost his grip. Run, Lena! Ruth shouted. Lena bolted. The stairs blurred beneath her feet as she rushed downward. Franklin lunged, grabbing her wrist. Pain shot through her arm. Stop fighting, he barked. You're coming home. That's not my home. She screamed. She twisted, pulled, kicked. Ruth slammed into Franklin with all her weight. They crashed into a wooden table. Jars shattered. Milk spilled across the floor in pale rivers. Get out of my house! Ruth roared. Seth grabbed Ruth's shoulder and shoved her violently against the wall. She gasped, pain flashing across her face. No! Lena cried. Leave her alone! Lena charged toward Seth, shoving him with all her strength. He stumbled backward in surprise, enough for Ruth to regain her footing and strike him with a broom handle. But the uncles were bigger, stronger, and they weren't giving up. Franklin wiped blood from his nose and snarled. We're taking her, Ruth, whether you like it or not. No, Ruth said fiercely. You're not. Franklin's hand shot out toward Lena again, but the front door burst open. Henry Collins, and behind him Sheriff Adams, two deputies, townspeople peering in from the porch. What the hell is going on in here? The sheriff roared. Everyone froze. Ruth, breathing hard. Lena, trembling. Franklin, Harold, and Seth, caught mid-violence. This woman is kidnapping our niece, Franklin shouted immediately. We're taking her home. She's lying, Lena cried. They threw me out. She's confused, Harold said with a fake tone of pity. Poor thing's been troubled ever since her mama died. She's telling the truth, Ruth snapped. They abandoned her, sold everything she owned, forced her onto the road. Enough, the sheriff barked. Nobody moves. The room was thick with tension. The sheriff looked at Lena, then at Ruth, then at the men, slowly, carefully, like someone fitting together puzzle pieces. Henry stepped forward. Sheriff, he said, nodding toward the uncles. I recognize these men. They were drinking at Miller's Tavern 3 nights ago, talking about selling off a farm, before the girl got old enough to complain. Franklin's face drained of color. Harold sputtered. That was a joke. It didn't sound like one, Henry snapped. Ruth placed a steady hand on Lena's back. Sheriff, she said calmly, Lena deserves to speak. Sheriff Adams nodded once. Go on, child. Lena swallowed. Her throat burned. Her hands shook, but she forced the truth out. They sold my home, she whispered. They took everything. Mom's things, our land. They told me I had to leave. They gave me a suitcase and a little money and said not to come back. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't run away, she said. I was thrown away. Ruth squeezed her shoulder, grounding her like a pillar. Silence hung, heavy, final. Then the sheriff spoke. Franklin, Harold, Seth, you're under arrest. What? Franklin roared. On what grounds? Neglect, the sheriff said. Exploitation, fraud, forcing a minor into dangerous circumstances. And that's just to start. The men protested, shouted, cursed, but the deputies moved swiftly, cuffing them one by one. Franklin glared at Lena as they dragged him out. You think this is over? He spat. Ruth stepped forward before Lena could speak. It is, Ruth said coldly. Because she's not your responsibility, Franklin sneered. Then whose is she? Ruth didn't hesitate. Mine. After the uncles were hauled away, the house fell into a stunned quiet. Henry lingered in the doorway. Ruth looked at him with a raised brow. You gonna say I told you so? Henry surprised both of them. No, he said. I'm gonna say I was wrong. Ruth blinked. Henry shifted awkwardly. I thought she was trouble, but trouble wasn't following her. It was chasing her. Lena looked at him, eyes wary. Henry sighed. You're safe now, kid. Riverside protects its own. He tipped his hat to Ruth. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." When he left, Ruth closed the door and turned to Lena. "Are you all right?" Lena nodded slowly, then shook her head, then nodded again. Ruth smiled softly. "That's fair." Lena hesitated, then threw her arms around Ruth. Ruth froze for a second, then pulled her in tightly. "You're safe," Ruth whispered. "You're not alone anymore." The words cracked Lena open. She cried into Ruth's shoulder, loud, painful sobs she could no longer hold back. Ruth held her through all of it, rubbing her back, whispering comfort, grounding her in the warmth of arms that truly felt like home. Not temporary, not conditional, not fragile, real. Weeks passed. Lena learned the rhythms of the dairy, the real ones, not the ones she'd been forced into, but the ones built on patience, gentleness, trust. She fed calves, she milked cows, she learned how to make butter with Ruth's methodical, calm instruction. She carried crates to the market. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time since her mother died. The people of Riverside softened too. They greeted her by name. They offered her treats at their stalls. They asked about Mabel, who became something of a town mascot. One evening, Lena and Ruth sat on the porch, watching the sun sink into the hills. "I never asked," Ruth said quietly, "but you know you don't have to stay here. If you ever want something different, school, travel, whatever your future holds, I'll help you get there." Lena looked at her gentle hands, her kind eyes, her steady presence. "I want to stay," Lena whispered. Ruth nodded, eyes misting. "Then stay." Lena leaned her head on Ruth's shoulder. For the first time in a long, long while, she felt whole, safe, home.